Hello, hi, Assalamualaikum everyone. Welcome back to our online class. So today we are going to be continuing topic 2, oral presentation skills. So I hope you have watched the previous video. So make sure you have your module with you right now before I start. Okay, let's begin. First, let's look at the objectives first. So the first objective is you have to be able to identify when and how visual aids will enhance your presentation. That is the first objective. The second objective is you have to be able to identify the different types of visual aids. So maksudnya kamu boleh kenal pasti jenis-jenis visual aids yang ada. And then number three, you have to be able to identify effective and ineffective use of visual aids. Number four, you have to be able to apply basic design principles to slide design. And lastly, number five, you have to be able to identify best practices to incorporate visual aids in your presentation. So as you may have not noticed, our second topic is largely revolved around visual aids. So let's continue. Use of visual aids. Okay, what is a visual aids? What is the purpose of using it? It is an items of a visual manner. Visual manner, that means it has to be something that you can see. And it is used in addition to spoken information. Spoken information is something that you say. So when you're doing a presentation, you have to speak. So you're saying something to your audience. And you can have visual aids for something your audience to see or to look at. Okay, so that is visual aid. So that means aids. The word aid maksudnya adalah untuk membantu kamu. So visual aid adalah benda yang membantu secara visual. So when you have visual aids, for example, there are graphs, you can have photos or video clips, and according to research, people who use visual aids are 43% more effective during presentation compared to people who do not use visual aids. So that is why we are encouraging you to use visual aids so that when you, for example, go to your the working industry, so you will be able to actually be a better presenter. So next, let's look at the purpose of visual aids. Purpose maksudnya tujuan. So what is the tujuan for using visual aids? Number one is to summarize information. So for example, kamu ada banyak data. So you have a lot of statistics. When you have visual aids, kamu boleh ringkaskan maklumat tu dalam cara yang menarik. And then number two, it is to create more impact. So for example, your speech is about the dangers of smoking. So you can show a photo of lung cancer. So your audience will actually be scared because it has a lot more impact than, for example, you just explaining about the dangers of lung cancer. Okay. And number three is to reduce the amount of spoken words. So you don't want to have a lot of words on your slide. So you can reduce the amount of words by having, for example, graphs or charts. Okay, so those are some of the benefits of using visual aids. And then you can also use visual aids to show examples untuk tunjuk contoh-contoh. And then you can also use it to emphasize what you are saying. So for example, you can create macam what I did here. You create a box. You can have arrows. So this way you are emphasizing what you are saying. And lastly, you can use visual aids to make something easier for your audience to understand. Because when you have visual aids, it looks a lot more nicer and it looks simpler. So your audience will be able to understand better. Okay, next, let's move on to types of visual aids. There are many types of visual aids. For example, photos. So photos, gambar. And then secondly, there are videos. So you can also show video clips in your lesson for your audience to watch. You could also include charts. So for example, the pie chart, there are many different types of charts. So you can use charts to deliver information involving numbers. You could also use graphs and you could also give handouts to your students. So audience, for example, you can give your slides or you can also give any information on paper to your audience for them to read. You could also use posters, and you could also use people. So for example, in this TED Talk, this presenter actually includes a baby during the presentation. So this is how you use people in your presentation as a visual aid. You can also use props or realia. Props or realia adalah, for example, something that you bring during your presentation. Like Steve Jobs, for example, he always brings the phone that he's promoting. So you're not just vaguely talking about something. So you actually have something that you bring. So maybe, for example, I want to talk about recycling. So I might bring a bottle of water. So how we should recycle plastic. So this is a bottle of a plastic bottle. Okay, so that is realia. And lastly, the most common thing is to use PowerPoint or Prezi, so some sort of slideshows. So these are examples of visual aids. Of course, there are a lot more types of visual aids that you might know, but these are just some basic examples that you can use in your presentation. Next, okay. I'm sure all of you are familiar with PowerPoint. Like what I'm using right now, this is a PowerPoint. I'm sure all of you have created PowerPoint slides in your life as well. But there is also a website called Prezi.com where you can use to create your slide. Okay, Prezi was rated as 16.36% more engaging than PowerPoint. Why? Because in Prezi, you can create a presentation using a map layout, and you can zoom in and out, and you can also use it to show relationships from a very interesting point of view. For example, let's watch this. Okay, so this is an example of a Prezi presentation. So as you can see, they have this map layout and a zoom in and zoom out function. So you can show connections or relationships from one point to another. So this is also another example of a Prezi presentation. Let's watch this. Okay, so as you can see, it looks a lot more interesting than a basic PowerPoint slide. So if you have free time, you can also try exploring this website. So this website is prezi.com. Next, let's continue. I want you guys to watch this video.
Hi, I'm Shannon Daniels, public speaking, communication, and success coach, and I'll be your education guide today. In today's lesson, we'll be learning some basic guidelines for creating effective visual aids. If you know how to properly create visual aids, they can enhance your presentation and help solidify your message. But if you use them incorrectly, they can weaken your presentation and distract your audience. Today I'll teach you 5 tips to create visual aids that bolster your presentation, engage your audience, and have lasting impact. So without further ado, let's get down to business. Tip 1, outline first. Many people jump straight into creating their visual aids before even outlining their speech. This is especially prevalent when using PowerPoint or Keynote, as these tools often get used as the speech is being created. While it's tempting to jump straight into the visuals, resist the temptation. Outlining your speech before you create your visual aids will help you to understand the key talking points you want to convey to your audience and which points you want to emphasize. It will also help you to understand the complex ideas or information that you need to explain in more detail. Once you know this, you can use your visual aids to emphasize your main points and explain complex ideas in an easy to understand way. Having your outline will also help you know how to order your visuals, be it slides, posters, or another type of aid. The second tip is know your audience and venue. It's important to know who you're talking to, how many people you're talking to, and where you'll be presenting. The more you understand about your audience, the better you'll be able to provide visuals that resonate with them and avoid visuals that may turn them off. The size of your audience and venue you're presenting in will also dictate what type of visual aid you should be using. For example, you wouldn't use a poster when standing on stage presenting to an audience of 500 or more people because nobody would be able to see or read it, except for maybe a few people in the front row. Tip number 3, choose the right type of visual aid. Since the invention of PowerPoint and similar technology, many presenters use these as their go-to visual aid. While these tools are incredibly powerful visual aids, they're not your only choice. If your presentation content, audience, and venue support other means, shake things up by getting creative and trying something different. Other types of visual aids that may be appropriate include posters, videos, props, objects, and models, photographs and drawings, maps, handouts, even other people. The options are limitless. And by straying from the norm, you're likely to stand out and be more memorable to your audience. The fourth tip is to pay attention to color and contrast. Just as what you wear says a lot about you, how you dress up your visual aids says a lot to your audience, whether they realize it or not. Color plays a major role in your audience's subconscious, so you should be careful when choosing colors for your visual aids. The color you choose sends a message, and you want to make sure that that message coincides with the message you are trying to send and how you want your audience to think or feel. For example, soft colors and pastels are soothing. Orange, red, and gold can create excitement. Pale blues, greens, and lilacs tend to lead people to feel empathy. And brighter, warmer colors are best when wanting to motivate or inspire your audience. It's important to not go overboard when choosing a color scheme. Stick to 2 or a maximum of 3 colors for your visuals. In addition, pay attention to contrast when choosing your colors. Neutral backgrounds with dark type are easiest on the eyes and therefore easiest for your audience to read. Finally, tip number 5, make it readable. And I'm speaking specifically about your font size. Tip 5 goes hand in hand with tip 2. Know your audience members, audience size, and venue. Knowing these 3 key things will help you to know what type of visual aids to use and how big to make them, especially the font size when utilizing words. A general rule of thumb for font size, especially for electronic visual aids such as PowerPoint or Keynote, is to use 24-point font when in a room where your audience will be 20 to 30 feet away from you, and to use 32-point font or larger when in a room where your audience will be 30 or more feet away from you. Remember, the purpose of visual aids is to capture your audience's attention and keep them engaged, enhance your presentation and increase effectiveness, simplify complex ideas, and ultimately reinforce your message and help your audience process and retain information. Use these.
Okay, so in this video, the presenter gave you 5 tips for creating visual aids. So let's review. So the first tip that she gave you is to outline first. So by outlining, you will be able to order your points and also decide what kind of visual aids that you would like to use. And secondly, you have to know your audience and also your venue. So audience and venue is important for you to decide what kind of visual aid to use. So which one is more appropriate for the venue? So for example, maybe you're presenting in a class, or are you presenting in a hall or in a field? So what kind of equipments will be available to you is important for you when you're deciding what kind of visual aids you want to prepare. Number three is you have to choose the right type of visual aids. So when you are choosing what kind of visual aids you want to use, you have to look at the information that you're trying to deliver. So if you're trying to deliver, for example, something with lots of numbers, you can use graphs or charts. So that depends on what kind of information you're trying to use. Number four, you have to pay attention to color and contrast. I'm going to explain this further later. And lastly, you have to make it readable. So when you're making it readable, you have to look at your font, the type, and also the size. So it has to be something that your audience can read. Okay, so now let's continue with the preparation of visual aids. So these are some basic information that you can find in your module. So the first one is you have to remember to avoid cluttering. Cluttering maksudnya making it messy. Letak banyak-banyak. So that is clutter. Why? Because when you clutter the image, it will look messy and unclear. Because when you have too many images, your audience will not know which one to look at. Secondly, you have to make sure your visual aids are clear, concise, and of a high quality. So you have to make sure your aids is from a very high quality, and then you have to keep the style consistent. That means using the same font, the same color, the same position. So for example, in my slide, I keep using the title is in the same font, the same position here, and also the same design. So that is keeping your style consistent. And then you can use graphs or charts to present data. And you have to make sure that your audience should not be trying to read and listen at the same time. So use visual aids only to highlight your points. Do not write your entire speech on your slide. Okay? And then make sure to remember only use visual aids in moderation. Moderation maksudnya dengan sederhana. So you don't have to use too much or too little. And keep one message per visual aid. So per visual aids, for example, one chart is only for one key point. One photo is only for one key point. Okay? And then you have to remember that your presentation have to work without your visual aids in case of technical problems. So for example, maybe on the day of your presentation, there is no electricity. How are you going to overcome that? How are you going to make sure that you can still continue with your presentation? And lastly, you have to practice. So practice using your visual aids and ask for feedback from your friends or your colleagues. Ask them whether they can see it clearly and can they interpret or can they understand the visual aids that you have prepared. So these are some tips. And then now let's look at good practices and bad practices. So good practices, for example, is one, to use color. Why? Because black and white slides are boring. So for example, in my slides, I use different colors to represent different meaning. And then you have to make sure the visual aid that you prepare is visible. So that means your audience have to be able to actually see it. And you have to use bold lettering or underline the underline function when you want to emphasize certain statistic or facts. You can also use different sizes of font to set off information based on the importance. So for example, for my title of this slide, I use a bigger font compared to this one and this one. Okay, so this is bigger, this is big, and this is medium, and this is small. Why? Because I want to highlight that this is the main title of this slide, and this is the small title, the minor, and then these are the information that I would like to present. So the size goes by the level of importance. And then number 5, you can consider using clip arts, for example, like the logo, these clip arts that I use. And you also have to remember to label your charts and graphs. So if you use any charts or graphs, make sure you label it. Make sure it has a title and the meaning for each part. Okay, so those are the good practices. Now let's look at the bad practices. So bad practices, number one is don't keep an image displayed for more than 10 minutes. Why? Because when you keep it for more than 10 minutes, your audience will get bored by looking at the same thing for a very long time. So change your image and then use cartoons or other cute addition or animation if it is appropriate for your audience. So for example, since I'm teaching you guys are my students, or I try to use something more fun. But if you're presenting, for example, in a corporate environment, then you can't use something that is too cute or too cartoonish. It has to be a lot more professional. And then number three, do not use different fonts throughout your presentation. So stick to one font. By that way, it will look a lot more clear and a lot more neat. And number four, do not overuse colors. So for example, in the previous video we watched, the presenter said you should use two primary colors and one secondary colors. So a total of three colors. Do not use more than three colors. Okay. So you decide what kind of colors you want to use and stick to those colors throughout your entire presentation. Okay. Now let's look at basic design principles. Okay, number one, the first thing that you have to remember is you should use color with purpose, like we mentioned in the video that the presenter mentioned. Why? Because people will actually draw connections between the color that you use and they will assign meaning to the colors. So for example, if you look at this slide, what when you look at the color red, you always think of something that is scary, something that is important. And blue always signifies something that is more calming, something that is correct. So when you see colors, it always uh, gives you a certain meaning because when you are watching or when you're looking at something, you always make unconscious connections between the color and the meaning or the information that you're trying to present. So you have to think about how and when you use certain colors to emphasize your information. So for example, in this slide, the designer used a blue earth color in the background and orange color to create something shocking. So the presenter is talking about carbon. And when you look at this slide, the presenter used the color orange to show you something, a statistic that is very high. So the CO2 level is high. So the presenter choose a brighter colors compared to the other parts. Okay. So how you use your colors is also very important when you're trying to deliver any information. So that is the first one. You have to remember to use color with purpose. Number two, don't be default. So what I mean by this is when you are trying to create your presentation, try to put in some effort. Because when you put in some effort, people will actually take notice and people will actually be more interested. They will respect you more. And a way to do this is to go beyond the default settings. I mean, do not use the basic template. For example, in PowerPoint, they have all these different types of templates that you can use. Don't just use the simple black and white. You can use different designs. There are also a lot of websites that actually provide free PowerPoint templates that actually looks interesting. So you can visit these websites and choose a template from here. And then when you're designing your visual aids, try to design it in a more interesting way. So for example, in this one, you can see the graph is not a typical graph. So when you have something like this, it will look a lot more interesting. Number three, let's look at number three is to use animation and transition with intention. So when you want to use animation and transition, you need to have a reason for using it. You need to have an intention. It's not just for decoration. So you can use it to, for example, pace your audience. So you want them to read this thing first and then this thing next. Okay. And you also you want them to have them read what you want them to read and when you want them to read something. So for example, in this animation here, or maybe let's look back at this. Let me show you this one. Okay. So when I show you this video, I played this video, then only I show you the key points. So this is a way of me making sure you watch the video first and then only you read the key points that I have prepared here. So that is how you pace your audience. That means you make them do certain things first and then you make them do something else. Okay. So that is the purpose of using transitions. Okay. So that is the third one. Now let's move on to the fourth one. So the fourth one is you have to make sure you find a good photo, a good quality visual aid. So make sure you take the time to choose something with a high quality. You can apply the right treatment. For example, you can use the black and white filter, like in this photo. This is to convey like a feeling of sadness, a serious feeling. You could also apply transparency, any other kinds of filter. Okay. By doing this, you are adding another level of powerful layer to your presentation. So for example, if you look at this is in black and white, and this is a highly saturated photo. So this actually makes you focus on the object that the photo is highlighting. And this is a low quality photo. So you can see the difference between all these photos. So when you're creating your presentation, make sure you take the time to choose good photos. And then number five, sorry, this is the wrong number. Okay, so for number five, you have to choose appropriate fonts. So with typography, you have to go for legibility. That means something that you can read over something fun. You can use creative font, but avoid using it for the text, the main text, okay? Instead, stick to clean traditional typefaces, and if you're using a dark background, make the text bold for readability. Okay, you have to focus on making sure the audience can read. So here are some examples of fonts. So for example, these are the typical clean and traditional fonts that is easy to read. And there is also this font that might look fun but would actually be a lot more difficult to read. So when you're choosing your font, make sure you're using something that is easy for your audience to read. Okay, next, let's look at an example of a bad use of visual aid. So this is an example of a slide. So if you look at this slide, there are a few things that we need to do to actually improve it. So for example, if you notice, the background of this slide is too colorful, and when it's too colorful it becomes distracting, maksudnya mengganggu kamu punya perhatian. And the color contrast between the background and the font is poor. Why? Because for example, if you look at the color of the background here, it's very dark and it's very bright, and then you have the font that is very difficult to read because the color, for example, in this part, the blue and the purple, they almost look the same. Okay, and then the texts are hard to read, and the photo is also unrelated. This photo has nothing to do with the points presented in this slide. Okay, so this is an example of a bad visual aid. Here's another example of a bad visual aid. So first, there are too many photos. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are a lot of photos. So when there are too many photos, it looks cluttered. That means it's messy. Dia nampak serabut. And then, okay, let's see. The side looks messy and cluttered. The font is also hard to read. So if you look at this font, it's actually difficult for you to read because dia berangkai, it's cursive, it's connected. And the color contrast is also poor because if you see the background is blue and the color of the font is also blue, it makes it difficult to read. So these are examples of bad visual aids. Now let's look at what you should do during your presentation. So first, you have to make sure your visual aids can be seen by everyone. And then you have to make sure as soon as you show your visual aid, you have to know that your audience attention will directly go towards what you're showing. So you must immediately explain it. Okay, don't just show something and then be quiet or talk about something that is unrelated. Okay, so when you show something, immediately explain it. And then make sure you must face the audience rather than the image or the slide. So if you have a slide, don't face it facing the slide. Okay, face your audience and avoid reading from the visual aid. So don't just read, so you have to explain. And then make it clear to your audience why you are using the visual aid. So if you're showing something to your audience, make sure you explain to them why is it relevant to your speech. And when you no longer need it, make sure the audience cannot see it anymore. So like it goes back to the point that we talked just now. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, when you no longer need it, okay, just hide it, move on to the next slide. Okay, so now we are during the end of our presentation or our class today. So this is a homework that I want you guys to do. So I want you to create visual aids for the following information. So number one is about social media platform usage among students. So here are some statistics and I want you guys to create, sorry, hello, Waalaikumsalam, siapa ni? Ya saya. Oh ya ke? Kalau minggu depan boleh tak? Sebab minggu ni saya ada mesyuarat dekat KL. Boleh. Dekat mana tadi? Dekat tepi, dekat klinik kesihatan bayu baru. Okey, boleh boleh. Ha. Okey. Okey. Terima kasih. Okey, Assalamualaikum. Okay. Sorry, I had a phone call. Okay, so this is the first one. And number two, I want you to create a visual aid for these statistics. Okay, it is about, sorry, this is GIF. Okay, so most frequently used visual aids. And number three, I want you to create a visual aid for this information. So you have the president, vice president, manager. Okay, so please create visual aids. Choose what kind of visual aid that you think is most suitable for this information. And please send it to me through Telegram. And before we end today's lesson, I want you guys to answer this surprise question. Do you prefer living by the beach or on a mountain? Do you like to live near the sea or on a mountain? And I want you to answer the questions in the Telegram, in our Telegram group. And then I will I will take your attendance according to your answers. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you so much, everyone. See you guys next week. Bye.